The rain came down in silver curtains, whispering secrets against the windshield of my old Honda as I navigated the shadowed streets of Davenport. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of night that felt heavy with unspoken truths, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and anticipation. I'd built coal construction from a single toolbox into a $12 million empire over 35 years, and I'd learned to trust my instincts when they stirred. Tonight they were clawing at me, urging me toward my daughter Brianna's house on Willow Lane. She'd called earlier, her voice bright but tinged with something I couldn't place. "Dad, swing by tonight. I've got something to show you," she'd said, her words carrying a warmth that reminded me of her mother Margaret in the early days of our marriage. I turned onto the quiet street, the tires hissing against the slick pavement. Brianna's craftsman-style home loomed ahead, its ivy-clad brick facade glowing faintly under the streetlights like a sentinel guarding secrets. I'd built this house for her, every nail and beam a testament to the life I'd created for my family. But as I pulled into the driveway, my breath caught in my throat. There, parked at the gate like a gleaming specter, was Margaret's silver Lexus, a car that should have been in our garage 20 miles away. My heart gave a single heavy thud, like a hammer striking a fault line. I cut the engine and sat in the dark, the rain's soft percussion filling the silence. Margaret had told me she was working late, buried in paperwork for the Henderson account. "Don't wait up, Alan," she'd said that morning, her green eyes flickering with a smile I'd once thought was love. For 30 years I'd trusted her, her laughter, her touch, the way she'd lean into me during quiet moments. But now, staring at her car, a shadow of doubt crept into my chest, cold and sharp as a blade. Why was she here at our daughter's house when Brianna had said she'd be out until late? I stepped into the drizzle, my boots sinking into the gravel with a muffled crunch. The air carried a faint, otherworldly hum, as if the night itself were holding its breath. I moved toward the house, drawn by an instinct I couldn't name, my steps silent as a predator's. The front window was cracked open, a sliver of golden light spilling onto the wet lawn like a forbidden invitation. I pressed myself against the damp brick wall, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my ears, and listened. Voices drifted through the gap, low and conspiratorial, laced with a malice that made my skin prickle. "When the old man finally signs the papers, we'll have everything." Margaret's voice slithered out, sharp and cold as a winter wind. "The business, the properties, the accounts, all of it ours to claim." My blood turned to frost. I knew that voice, but not this version of it. This wasn't the Margaret who'd laughed at my terrible puns or held my hand through sleepless nights when Brianna was born. This was a stranger, her words dripping with a venom I'd never tasted. Another voice joined hers. Dan, my son-in-law, his lawyer's cadence polished yet predatory, like a wolf circling its prey. "The timeline's flawless," he said, his tone gleaming with dark satisfaction. "File in June. Claim irreconcilable differences. Iowa's laws will grant Margaret half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus spousal support for life. Coal construction alone is worth $12 million. Add the rental properties, the vacation home, the investments, $20 million minimum." My hands shook as I reached for my phone, an instinct older than reason urging me to capture this betrayal. I hit record, the device, a silent sentinel preserving the unraveling of my world. Margaret's laugh cut through the air, a sound that once felt like sunlight, but now burned like poison. "He's so trusting, Dan. Alan thinks I've been the devoted wife for 30 years, nodding through his endless construction stories, pretending to care about his payroll woes. God, he actually believes I love him." A twig snapped under my foot, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the stillness. The voices inside fell silent, and I pressed myself tighter against the wall, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. Sweat mingled with the rain on my skin, the chill of April seeping into my bones. "Did you hear that?" Margaret's voice carried a note of suspicion, a predator sensing a shift in the shadows. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Dan replied, but his tone held a flicker of unease. "You're paranoid, Margaret. Can you blame me?" she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "If Alan finds out before we're ready—" "He won't." Dan cut in his laughter, cold and mocking. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it wore a neon sign and danced in his office. I stayed rooted to the spot, my phone still recording, capturing every treacherous word. The rain soaked through my jacket, but I barely noticed. My mind was a storm of its own, replaying 30 years of moments I'd thought were sacred. Margaret's hand in mine during our Alaskan cruise, her tears of pride at Brianna's college graduation. The quiet nights when she'd whispered, "I love you," in the dark. Had it all been a lie? A carefully woven tapestry of deception to keep me building an empire she could steal. I crept back to my car, my movements slow and deliberate, like a man walking through a dream he couldn't wake from. The Lexus gleamed under the streetlight, a mocking symbol of Margaret's entitlement, a trophy of the life I'd provided. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could tether me to reality. The phone in my pocket held 43 minutes of truth, a blade I hadn't yet learned to wield, but one I knew would change everything. As I sat there, the rain painting rivulets on the windshield, a memory surfaced unbidden. 30 years ago, at a company Christmas party, Margaret had laughed at my terrible joke about concrete mixers. Her laughter had been like silver bells, bright and unguarded, making my chest tighten with a longing I hadn't known I was capable of. I'd proposed 6 months later, believing I'd found a partner who saw the same future I did, a life built on trust, on love, on shared dreams. Now that memory felt like a ghost haunting the edges of this new, darker reality. But something else stirred within me, a spark of the resilience that had turned a single truck into a construction empire. I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was Alan Cole, a man who'd built something from nothing, who'd faced storms of every kind, and come out stronger. The voices in that house thought they were playing a game of chess with a pawn. They were about to learn I was a king, and this board was mine to command. I started the engine, the hum, a quiet promise of the battle to come. The rain fell harder, as if the night itself were conspiring to keep my secret. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing: the truth was in my hands, and I would wield it like a weapon forged in fire. The rain had woven a shroud around Brianna's house, cloaking me in its silver veil, as I stood pressed against the damp brick wall. The cracked window was a portal to a world I'd never known existed, one where my wife of 30 years and my son-in-law conspired like thieves in a forgotten myth. My phone, clutched in my trembling hand, recorded every word, its silent hum a lifeline, anchoring me to the truth. Margaret's voice, sharp as a shard of glass, sliced through the night, each syllable a betrayal deeper than the last. "When the old man signs the papers, we'll have everything we've planned for," she said, her tone laced with a cruel certainty that made my stomach churn. The construction empire, the rental properties, the offshore accounts, $20 million, Dan, all ours. I froze my breath, catching like a moth in a spider's web. Offshore accounts. How did she know about those I'd buried, them deep, hidden behind layers of legal safeguards? Only my accountant, Marcus Webb, could unravel. For 30 years I'd trusted Margaret with my heart, my dreams, my life. But never those accounts. They were my insurance, a fortress built not out of distrust, but out of the pragmatism that had turned Cole Construction from a single truck into a titan. Had she been digging through my secrets all this time, unearthing what I'd thought was untouchable? Dan's voice slithered into the conversation, smooth and predatory, like a serpent weaving through tall grass. "The timeline's impeccable, Margaret. We file in June, citing irreconcilable differences. Iowa's divorce laws are clear: you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus spousal support for life. Cole Construction alone is valued at $12 million. The rental properties add another 5, the vacation home, 2, and the investments. Well, we're looking at a conservative $20 million total." My knees buckled, and I leaned harder against the wall, the cold brick grounding me against the vertigo of betrayal. My phone's screen glowed faintly, the recording timer ticking forward, capturing every venomous word. Margaret laughed, a sound that once warmed my soul, but now felt like a curse. "The beautiful part is his trust," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. Alan's been so busy building his empire, he never noticed me cataloging it. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, I've got copies of everything tucked away where he'll never find them. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, she continued her words slicing deeper with every breath. Nodding through his endless stories about concrete pours and labor disputes, pretending to care when he worried about cash flow. God, Dan, he actually believes I love him. The words hit like a sledgehammer, shattering the fragile mosaic of our 30-year marriage. I saw flashes of her, Margaret, at our wedding, radiant in ivory silk. Margaret holding Brianna, exhausted but glowing. Margaret whispering, "I love you," in the quiet of our bedroom. Had it all been a performance, a mask worn to lull me into complacency, while she plotted to steal the life I'd built? My chest tightened, grief and rage warring within me, but I forced myself to stay still, to let the phone capture every damning syllable. Dan's voice cut through again, crisp with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "He's practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. Those late nights you spent organizing his office, pure genius. Every document we needed was right there waiting. He's so predictable, Margaret, always leaving his files unlocked, always trusting you to handle the household accounts." I clenched my jaw, the rain masking the tremor in my hands. Predictable. Trusting, the words stung, but they also ignited something within me. A spark of defiance, the same fire that had driven me to build coal construction from nothing. They thought they knew me, thought they could map my every move like a blueprint. But they'd underestimated the man who'd turned dreams into steel and stone. Margaret's voice lowered, taking on a conspiratorial edge that sent a shiver down my spine. The offshore accounts were the trickiest part. He thought he was so clever, hiding them behind all those shell companies. But I've been watching Dan. Every late-night call with Marcus, every cryptic email about tax optimization. I pieced it together. By the time we file, he won't have a single asset we haven't accounted for. My mind raced. How had she found the accounts? Marcus was meticulous, a vault of discretion, who'd safeguarded my finances for 2 decades. Had she intercepted my emails, rifled through my office? Or worse, had she seduced someone in Marcus's firm to betray me? The thought twisted like a knife, but it also sharpened my focus. If Margaret knew about the accounts, she was more dangerous than I'd realized. A spider spinning a web I'd walked into blindly. Dan chuckled, the sound low and menacing, like a storm gathering on the horizon. "The best part, he'll never see it coming. By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you want with whoever you want. Alan will be left with nothing but his precious company, and even that will be gutted by the time we're done." The words hung in the air, heavy with malice. Whoever you want. The implication was a shadow hinting at a deeper betrayal I hadn't yet grasped. Was there more to their partnership than money? The thought made my stomach lurch, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the recording. Every word was a brick in the wall I'd build to protect myself, to turn their conspiracy against them. A sudden rustle in the bushes nearby made my heart leap into my throat. I froze, my breath shallow, as the voices inside paused. What was that? Margaret's tone was sharp, a hunter sensing prey. Dan's reply was dismissive, but I caught the edge of unease. "Just the wind, Margaret. Or that damn cat again." "Relax. If Alan's out there—" she began, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't confidence either. "He's not," Dan snapped. "He's probably at the office poring over blueprints like the workhorse he is. By the time he suspects anything, we'll have everything locked down." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my pulse pounding like a drumbeat of war. The rain was my ally, masking my presence, but I couldn't stay much longer. The risk of discovery was too great, and I needed time to process what I'd heard, to forge a plan from the ashes of my trust. I waited until their conversation resumed. Margaret detailing the timeline for filing, Dan outlining the legal maneuvers that would bury Alan in court. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the life I'd known, but also a spark fueling the fire within me. I slipped back to my car, my movements silent as a ghost's, the phone still recording their treachery. The Lexus gleamed under the streetlight, a mocking monument to Margaret's greed. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands steady despite the storm raging in my chest. The recording stopped at 43 minutes, a digital relic of betrayal that would become my greatest weapon. As I sat there, the rain painting patterns on the windshield memories flooded me unbidden. Our first date at Romano's, where Margaret had listened to my dreams of building homes, her eyes sparkling with what I'd thought was love. "You're not just building structures," she'd said, her hand warm on mine. "You're building homes." I'd proposed 6 months later, believing I'd found a partner who shared my vision. Now those memories felt like mirages, shimmering illusions in a desert of lies. But beneath the grief, something else stirred, a quiet, unyielding strength. I was Alan Cole, the man who'd turned a borrowed hammer into a construction empire, who'd faced bankruptcies, labor strikes, and city councils with nothing but grit and cunning. Margaret and Dan thought they were playing a game of shadows, but they'd forgotten who built the board they stood on. I wasn't just a trusting husband. I was a strategist, a survivor, a man who knew how to turn betrayal into victory. I started the engine, the low rumble a promise of the reckoning to come. The night closed around me, the rain a chorus of whispers urging me forward. I didn't know the full scope of their plan yet, but I knew one thing. They'd awakened something in me, a force, as unyielding as the steel I'd built my life upon. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war, and I was ready to fight. The engine of my Honda purred softly as I pulled away from Brianna's house, the rain-slicked streets of Davenport stretching before me like a labyrinth of secrets. The phone in my pocket burned with the weight of 43 minutes of recorded betrayal, Margaret's venomous words and Dan's predatory calculations echoing in my mind. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white as I navigated the familiar roads by muscle memory alone. The world I'd known for 30 years had shattered, its fragments sharp enough to cut. But beneath the pain, a quiet fire kindled, a resolve forged in the crucible of my life's work. I was Alan Cole, the man who'd built an empire from a single hammer. They thought they'd outplayed me, but the game had only just begun. I drove aimlessly for a while, the rain a relentless drumbeat against the windshield mirroring the storm in my chest. Memories clawed at me. Margaret's laughter at our wedding, her hand steadying mine during Brianna's first fever. The quiet nights when we'd planned our future over glasses of wine. Had it all been a lie? Her voice from the recording haunted me. "He actually believes I love him." The words were a blade slicing through 30 years of trust, leaving behind a wound that bled grief and rage in equal measure. But grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. I needed clarity, a plan, a way to turn their conspiracy into their undoing. I pulled into a deserted lot near the river, the Mississippi's dark waters glinting under the streetlights like a mirror to my fractured soul. I replayed the recording, forcing myself to listen again, to dissect every word for clues. Margaret's mention of the offshore accounts gnawed at me. How had she found them? I'd buried those funds in a maze of legal safeguards known only to Marcus Webb, my accountant and confidant of 20 years. Had she bribed someone in his firm? Hacked my emails? Or worse, had she woven her charm around Marcus himself, turning my ally into her pawn? The thought was a shadow, dark and elusive, but it sharpened my focus. If Margaret had penetrated my defenses, she was more cunning than I'd ever imagined. Dan's voice was equally revealing, his lawyer's precision, outlining a plan as meticulous as any blueprint I'd ever drafted. "By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you want with whoever you want." The phrase lingered heavy with implication. Was there more to their partnership than greed? A personal betrayal layered beneath the financial one, the possibility twisted like a thorn in my gut, but I pushed it aside. Speculation was a distraction. I needed evidence, strategy, control. I was still processing when the front door of Brianna's house opened, a rectangle of golden light spilling into the night. Margaret emerged first, her designer handbag swinging casually at her side. her silhouette framed against the glow like a figure from a dark fairy tale. Dan followed, adjusting his tie with the practiced precision of a man who thought appearances were armor. They hadn't seen my car parked just beyond the streetlight's reach, shrouded in the rain's embrace. I watched them, my pulse a steady drumbeat as their expressions shifted from confidence to shock. Margaret's voice climbed an octave, her face pale as moonlight as she spotted me in the driver's seat. "What are you doing here?" I forced a smile, the kind I'd used to win over skeptical city councilors and nervous investors. 30 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, but now I saw the cracks in her facade, the flicker of panic in her green eyes, the slight tremble in her manicured hand. "Just finished a job site inspection nearby," I lied, my voice smooth as polished steel. "Thought I'd swing by to see Brianna." She mentioned a surprise. Dan stepped closer to Margaret, his gray eyes studying me with the intensity of a predator, sizing up a threat. "She's not here," he said, his tone clipped professional. "Margaret was just helping me organize some legal documents for a client." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, but I caught the glance he exchanged with Margaret. A silent signal, a conspirator's code. How many lies had I swallowed, over the years blind to their choreography? "Oh!" I kept my voice light, conversational as I climbed out of the car, letting the rain dampen my jacket. "I thought you'd be at work until 6, Margaret. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning?" A flicker of panic crossed her face, so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. "I left early," she said quickly, headache. "Sorry to hear that," I replied, turning to Dan with a manufactured friendliness that masked the storm within. "Working on an interesting case asset division," he said. Without thinking, then caught himself, his jaw tightening. "For a divorce client. Complex financial situation." The irony was almost laughable, a dark comedy scripted by their own arrogance. Margaret's eyes darted between us, calculating her composure, fraying at the edges. "How long have you been here, Alan?" she asked, her smile painted on brittle as glass. "Just pulled up," I lied, again leaning casually against the car. "Why? You seem tense. Everything okay?" The woman who'd plotted my financial ruin had the audacity to feign concern. "Long day," she said. Her laugh forced a hollow echo of the warmth I'd once cherished. "You know how it is." "I do," I said, my gaze flicking to Dan, who'd placed a hand on Margaret's lower back, a gesture too familiar, too intimate. How long had that been happening? The question burned, but I buried it, focusing on the game. "Don't let me interrupt your work session. We were just finishing up." Dan said, his hand lingering on Margaret as if staking a claim. His eyes lingered on my phone as I pulled it out to check the time, a subtle tell of his paranoia. "Good timing, then." I opened the car door, then paused as if struck by a sudden thought. "Oh, Margaret, Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule." It was a fabrication, a dart thrown to test her reaction. Her face went blank for a split second, the look of a liar caught off guard. Then she recovered, her smile tightening. "Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later. No worries," I said, sliding into the driver's seat, my heart pounding with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. These things happen. As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in the rearview mirror. They stood frozen like statues in a cursed garden until my car rounded the corner. Then they moved closer, heads bent in urgent whispers, their silhouettes swallowed by the rain. The dance of deception was in full swing. Margaret and Dan suspecting I'd overheard something, me knowing the depth of their betrayal, and all of us pretending the world hadn't shifted beneath our feet. I drove home, the streets blurring into a tapestry of light and shadow. The recording in my pocket was a talisman, a fragment of truth in a world of lies. Margaret would arrive soon, armed with excuses for her early departure from work and her presence at Dan's house. She'd weave a story as elegant as the lies she'd fed me for years, but she didn't know about the audio. 43 minutes of crystal-clear evidence, that would change everything. As I pulled into our circular driveway, the house loomed before me, a monument to the life I'd built, every brick and beam a testament to my labor. The manicured gardens, the fountain Margaret had commissioned for our 20th anniversary, the windows I'd installed with my own hands, they all felt different now, tainted by her betrayal. I sat in the car staring at the front door and felt the weight of 30 years settle over me. I'd walked Margaret down the aisle when her father refused, built her a life of comfort. She'd taken for granted, loved her with a devotion I'd thought was mutual. And yet her voice echoed in my mind, "He actually believes I love him." The worst part. Until an hour ago I had. But the grief was giving way to something else. A cold, focused clarity, the kind that had guided me through collapsing deals and impossible deadlines. Margaret and Dan thought they were playing chess with a pawn, a trusting fool who'd never suspect their game. They were wrong. I was Alan Cole, a man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd faced storms and emerged stronger. The recording was my first weapon, but it wouldn't be my last. I stepped out of the car, the rain washing away the last traces of my naivety, and walked toward the house. The war had begun, and I was ready to fight. The rain had ceased, leaving the night air sharp, with the scent of wet earth and possibility. My Honda sat in the driveway of my home, its engine cooling as I stood in the shadow of the house I'd built a monument to, 30 years of labor, now tainted by Margaret's betrayal. The recording in my pocket, 43 minutes of her and Dan's venomous conspiracy, was a talisman of truth, its weight grounding me against the storm of rage and grief. I was no longer the trusting husband who'd driven to Brianna's house hours ago. I was Alan Cole, the man who'd forged Cole Construction from a single hammer and a relentless will, and I would not let their treachery dismantle my empire. The war had begun, and this was the moment to build my defenses. I entered the house, the silence within, heavy as a cathedral's hush. The wedding photo on the mantel, Margaret radiant, me hopeful, mocked me with its frozen lies. I turned away, my boots echoing on the hardwood as I headed to my office, a fortress of blueprints and contracts that held the secrets of my success. The door locked behind me with a resolute click, sealing me into a space where strategy would replace sentiment. Margaret thought she'd mapped my empire, but she'd underestimated the architect. I sat at my desk, the oak surface scarred from years of drafting plans, and opened my leather-bound journal, its blank pages a canvas for the battle ahead. The recording had revealed Margaret's knowledge of my offshore accounts, a secret I'd buried in a labyrinth of legal shells known only to Marcus Webb, my accountant of 2 decades. How had she found them? The question was a shadow slithering through my thoughts, suggesting a deeper betrayal. Perhaps a traitor in Marcus's firm, a hacked email, or something more sinister. I dialed Marcus's number, a lifeline in the darkness. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp despite the late hour. "Alan, what's wrong? I need the offshore accounts locked down," I said, my tone unyielding. "No access, no visibility, not a trace." "Can you make them vanish?" A pause heavy with understanding. Marcus had seen me through financial storms before, his discretion as reliable as concrete. "They're secure, but I can bury them deeper. New encryption rerouted through a Bahamas trust. It'll be a ghost by dawn." "What's going on?" "Trouble," I said, keeping it vague. "Someone knows about the accounts. I need to know how." "I'll check for breaches," he said, his keyboard already clicking. "If there's a leak, I'll find it. Expect a report by morning." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, hanging up. The spark of resolve in my chest flared brighter, a fire kindled by 35 years of building something from nothing. Margaret's knowledge was a puzzle, but puzzles could be solved. I turned to my laptop, its screen casting a spectral glow across the desk. The joint accounts were the first battlefield, checking savings credit lines, every thread tying me to Margaret. Her credit card statements revealed a trail of extravagance, $47,000 in unauthorized transfers over 9 months funneled to an account in Dan's name. A $4,000 dinner at Riverside Country Club, $500 spa. Visits, a $9,000 watch purchased just last week. The audacity was staggering, each transaction a brick in the wall of her new life built on my labor. Dan was the next target. His lawyer's polish hid a man drowning in debt, and I needed to know how deep the water was. A call to Jim Morrison, a supplier and friend of 20 years, confirmed my suspicions. "Thompson's a slick talker," Jim had said over drinks last month, "but he's in over his head. Owes my crew $30,000, always dodging payment with excuses." A quick search on the State Bar Association's website revealed 2 ethical complaints against Dan. In the past year, client fund mismanagement dismissed but lingering like stains on his record. His financials were a house of cards: $200,000 in student loans, a $9,000 monthly office lease chosen for prestige, and a reputation for cutting corners when cash ran dry. He wasn't just a conspirator, he was a desperate man. And desperation was a weakness I could exploit. I leaned back, the office alive with the hum of strategy. Yellow legal pads sprawled across the desk, scrawled with notes: assets secured. Dan's debts. Margaret's transfers. Offshore breach. I needed to choke off their access to my wealth, to turn their greed against them. I dialed Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank, and a golf partner who'd seen me through lean years. His voice was warm but cautious. "Alan, it's past midnight." "What's up?" "Security review," I said, my tone clipped professional. "Freeze all joint accounts, checking savings credit lines. Require in-person verification with photo ID and secondary documentation for any access." Tom whistled softly. "That's a lockdown, Alan. Every account, every one I confirmed. How fast can you make it happen?" "By morning," he said, his tone shifting to business. "Margaret's going to hit a wall next time she tries to spend." "You sure about this?" "Absolutely," I said, a grim smile forming. "It's time to protect what's mine." The call ended, and I felt the first stirrings of control, like a foundation settling into place. The freezes would hit Margaret like a thunderbolt, her social empire crumbling when her cards failed. But I needed more than financial barriers. I needed to know the depth of their conspiracy. I contacted Mike Rodriguez, a private investigator whose discretion had saved me from a thieving subcontractor years ago. Follow Margaret and Dan. I told him over a secure line. Every move, every meeting, every call. And dig into Dan's financials, debts, transactions, anything that smells like trouble. On it, Mike said, his voice a low growl of efficiency. "What am I looking for?" "Proof," I said, "of a plan to take me down. And if you find a trail to my offshore accounts, chase it to the end." The office pulsed with purpose now, its walls witnesses to a transformation. I opened a hidden compartment in my desk, revealing a locked steel box, a relic from my early days when every dollar was a gamble. Inside was a single key, a symbol of the offshore account's secrecy, a reminder of the foresight that had kept them hidden. I turned it over in my hand, its weight a promise of protection. Margaret thought she'd mapped my empire, but she'd only seen the surface. The real fortress was buried deep, and I'd make sure it stayed that way. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Accounts buried. Found a trace, an unauthorized login attempt from a Chicago IP address 6 weeks ago. Investigating now, call at noon." The message was a spark igniting new questions. Chicago Dan had clients there, but a hacker seemed more likely a hired shadow to crack my defenses. The mystery deepened, but so did my resolve. I'd built coal construction through storms of every kind: labor strikes, market crashes, city council battles, and I'd face this one with the same unyielding will. I stood my reflection in the window, a portrait of a man reborn. The Alan Cole who'd trusted blindly was gone, replaced by a strategist, a warrior who saw every angle, every weakness. Margaret and Dan thought they were playing chess with a pawn, but they'd awakened a king. The board was mine, and I was ready to move. The dawn light filtered through the office window, casting long shadows across the desk, where my war room had taken shape. The leather-bound journal lay open, its pages a map of my counteroffensive against Margaret and Dan's betrayal. The offshore accounts were locked down, The joint accounts frozen, and Mike Rodriguez was already tracking their movements like a bloodhound on a scent. But the weight of the recording in my pocket, 43 minutes of venomous truth pressed against me like a talisman, both a shield and a sword. I was Alan Cole, the man who'd built an empire from grit and cunning, and I was ready to fight. Yet a new shadow loomed: my daughter Brianna. How much did she know? And how much could I bear to tell her? The phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Brianna's name flashed on the screen, and my heart clenched, a mix of love and dread. She was my daughter, my pride, a licensed psychologist whose sharp mind saw through facades as easily as I read blueprints. Her call at this hour, just past 6 a.m., was no coincidence. I answered, keeping my voice warm, steady, a father's shield against the storm. "Hey, sweetheart, you're up early." "Dad, we need to talk." Brianna said, her tone careful, measured like a surgeon probing for a wound. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. Between you and Mom, there's this tension. It's been building for weeks, and I need to know what's going on." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and closed my eyes. Her words were a mirror reflecting the cracks in the family facade I'd been too blind to see until last night. "What makes you ask?" I said, buying time, testing the waters. Did she know something, or was this her intuition at work, honed by years of studying human behavior? "It's little things," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "Mom's been stressed about money, which doesn't make sense. Cole Construction's never been stronger. You just landed the Morrison contract. And Dan?" She paused, and I caught the hesitation, a flicker of doubt about her own husband. "He's been asking weird questions about your company. How the partnerships work, who controls what assets. It feels like he's fishing, Dad, but I don't know why." Her words sent a chill through me, colder than the rain that had soaked me last night. Dan was probing Brianna, using her trust to gather intelligence for their conspiracy. The thought of my daughter caught in their web ignited a protective fury, but I kept my tone calm, a strategist's mask. "Probably just curiosity about the business world," I said, the lie smooth but bitter. "Your mom's always been interested in financial security." "Maybe," Brianna said, but her tone was unconvinced, sharp, with the skepticism of a woman trained to spot deception. "Dad, if something's wrong, really wrong, you'd tell me, right?" The question hung between us like a drawn blade, sharp and dangerous. "Tell her what?" That her mother was plotting to strip me of everything I'd built, that her husband was orchestrating the scheme, using her psychology practice as a potential weapon. The truth would shatter her world as it had mine. But Brianna wasn't a child. She was 30, a professional, a woman who'd built her own life with the same stubborn resolve I'd passed down. Still, I hesitated, the weight of a father's love warring with the strategist's need for control. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer now. "Everything's fine, just the usual business pressures. You know how it is." She didn't reply immediately, and I could almost hear her mind working, analyzing my words for the truth beneath them. "Okay," she said finally, but the word carried a note of resolve. "I'm coming by the office today. We need to talk in person." The call ended, and I sat in the quiet, the journal's pages staring up at me like an accusation. Brianna's intuition was a beacon cutting through the fog of deception Margaret and Dan had woven, but it also meant she was dangerously close to the truth, a truth I wasn't sure I could shield her from. I needed to prepare, to decide how much to reveal and how to protect her from the fallout. The war I was waging wasn't just mine anymore, it was hers too. By 10 a.m., Cole Construction's headquarters buzzed with the familiar hum of activity phones, ringing blueprints unrolled, the scent of coffee and concrete dust in the air. My office, a fortress of oak and steel, felt like the eye of the storm. Sarah, my secretary of 8 years, greeted Brianna with the warmth reserved for family. "He's expecting you, honey," she said, her smile genuine. "Go right in." Brianna entered, her posture professional, but her green eyes eerily like Margaret's, yet clearer, purer, searching my face with a clinician's precision. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair pulled back every inch the psychologist who'd spent years unraveling the minds of others. But today, she was a daughter caught in a web she didn't yet understand. "Dad," she said, sitting across from my desk, her hands folded precisely. "I need your perspective. Mom's been talking to me and I think she's trying to manipulate me." My heart skipped a mix of pride and pain. Brianna's training had made her a sentinel against deception, but it also meant she was already sensing the rot at the heart of our family. "What did she say?" I asked, my voice steady though my pulse thrummed with anticipation. "She says you're exhibiting controlling behaviors," Brianna said, her tone neutral, clinical. "Financial manipulation, possible emotional abuse. She wants me to support her narrative, to use my credentials to back her up. But it doesn't add up, Dad. I know you. This isn't you." Her words were a lifeline pulling me from the abyss of betrayal. But they also tightened the knot in my chest. She was too close to the truth, and I couldn't protect her from it much longer. "What do you think?" I asked, studying her face, searching for the line between daughter and ally. "I think Mom's trying to use my training against you," she said, her voice hardening with a quiet anger. "She asked me to evaluate your mental state, to provide a professional opinion that you're abusive. But her story's inconsistent with everything I know about you. I told her I can't assess someone without proper evaluation, that her claims don't match your behavior." She didn't like that. Pride surged through me, fierce and bright. Brianna wasn't just my daughter, she was a force, a mind as sharp as any blade I'd wielded. But the weight of what I held in my pocket, the recording, pressed heavier. Once I played it, there'd be no going back. She'd hear her mother's betrayal, her husband's treachery, and the family she'd known would crumble. "Brianna," I said, my voice low, "are you sure you want the truth? It's not going to be easy." Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. "Show me the evidence, Dad. I need to hear what you heard." I hesitated, the father in me wanting to shield her, the strategist knowing she was already part of this war. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing like a forbidden artifact, and pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the office, sharp and cruel as a winter wind. "When the old man finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." Brianna's expression didn't change at first, her professional detachment a shield as she listened. Margaret's mockery of our marriage. Dan's cold calculations for asset seizure. Their plan to manipulate Brianna's credentials. All of it poured out, raw and unrelenting. But when Margaret's voice sneered, 25 years of playing the devoted wife," Brianna's composure cracked. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed, a single tear tracing a silent path down her cheek. The recording ended and silence stretched between us, heavy as a storm cloud. "How long have you known?" she asked, finally, her voice steady but laced with pain. "Since last night," I said, my throat tight. "I overheard them at your house. I've been building a defense since." She leaned back, her gaze distant, processing. "Mom asked me to assess you, to paint you as the villain. She tried to use my training as a weapon, Dad, against you and my own ethics. I'm sorry you're in this, sweetheart." I said, the words heavy with regret. "I didn't want you to carry this." "I'm glad I know," she said, her voice sharpening with resolve. "The question is, what happens now?" I studied her, seeing the strength I'd helped forge, the independence I couldn't control. "That's your choice, Brianna. I won't ask you to pick sides. I already have," she said, standing, her posture resolute. "I choose truth over loyalty. I choose evidence over emotion. And I choose the parent who didn't try to manipulate me." Relief flooded me, followed by a pang of concern. "What about Dan?" Her expression turned cold, a psychologist assessing a patient she'd already diagnosed. "My husband conspired to destroy my father while hiding behind my practice." "That marriage is over, Brianna," I began, but she cut me off. "I'm not deciding in anger, Dad. I'm deciding based on character, on evidence." She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the knob. "I'll testify if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon. Not theirs, not yours." "I understand," I said, and I did. She was her own force, a beacon of truth in a storm of lies. "Good," she said, her voice softening. "Because there's one more thing I need to do." She left her stride, purposeful, a woman who'd found clarity in a world designed to obscure it. I sat alone, surrounded by the evidence of my empire, and felt a flicker of hope. Brianna wasn't just my daughter, she was my ally, and together we'd face the shadows. The war was far from over, but the battlefield was shifting in my favor. The war room of my office felt like a fortress, now its oak shelves and steel desk a bulwark against the betrayal that had fractured my world. The leather-bound journal lay open its pages, a tapestry of my counter-offensive offshore accounts, secured joint accounts, frozen. Mike Rodriguez tracking Margaret and Dan's every move. The recording 43 minutes of their venomous conspiracy sat on my phone like a relic of truth, its power growing with each step I took to dismantle their plan. Brianna's decision to stand with me, her resolve as sharp as a blade, had shifted the tide. But the battlefield was still alive with shadows, and I knew the next blow would come from Margaret and Dan's desperation. I was Alan Cole, the man who'd built an empire from a single hammer, and I was ready to watch my enemies unravel. The morning sun climbed higher, casting golden spears through the office window, but the warmth couldn't touch the cold clarity within me. I'd spent the night weaving a net of defenses, each move calculated to choke off Margaret's access to the wealth she'd taken for granted. Tom Bradley's confirmation had come at midnight. Every joint account, credit line, and automatic payment was frozen, requiring in-person verification with photo ID and secondary documentation. Margaret would feel the walls closing in the moment she tried to use her cards. But the deeper mystery lingered. How had she uncovered my offshore accounts? The anomaly. Marcus had found a login attempt from an unfamiliar IP address, was a thread I couldn't yet pull without risking the entire web. I needed more evidence, more time, and I needed to stay one step ahead. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. Mike Rodriguez's name flashed on the screen, his voice low and urgent when I answered. "Alan, I've got something." Margaret was at Riverside Country Club this morning, tried to charge a $2,000 brunch for her usual crowd. Card declined. She made a scene, insisted it was a mistake, but the manager held firm. She left humiliated, called someone from her car. My guess is Dan. I'm tailing her now. She's heading toward his office. A grim satisfaction settled over me, like the first nail driven true in a new build. "Good," I said. "Keep eyes on her. I want to know who she meets, what she says. And Dan's financials, any progress, plenty." Mike said, his tone sharp with discovery. "He's drowning in debt, $180,000 in student loans, $10,000 in unpaid office rent, and a string of overdraft fees. The guy's been juggling credit cards to keep up appearances. I also found a wire transfer from Margaret's personal account to his $47,000 over 8 months. Looks like she's been bankrolling his lifestyle." The pieces were falling into place, each one a brick in the wall I was building to trap them. "Keep digging," I said. "If they're meeting, I want every detail." I hung up the office silent, except for the faint hum of the city beyond. Margaret's humiliation at the club was just the beginning, a crack in the facade she'd polished for years. She'd always thrived on her social standing, the queen of Riverside's elite, her designer bags and charity galas, a mask for the greed I now saw clearly. But the frozen accounts were my first strike, a warning that her empire of lies was crumbling. An hour later, Margaret's call came, her voice a brittle mix of panic and feigned calm. "Alan, there's a problem with my credit card," she said, the words rushed, as if she could outrun the truth. "It was declined at the club this morning, in front of everyone. Do you know what's going on?" I leaned back in my chair, my tone smooth as polished steel. "That's odd," I said, letting a hint of concern mask my intent. "Must be a bank glitch." "Did you call them?" "Of course I did," she snapped, her composure fraying. "They said the accounts are frozen pending some ridiculous verification process." "Alan, "This is humiliating. You need to fix this. I'll look into it." I lied, my voice steady, a contractor assuring a client while knowing the foundation was already cracked. Probably just a security protocol. Banks get cautious sometimes. Cautious. Her voice climbed sharp with suspicion. "This doesn't happen out of nowhere, Alan. Did you do something?" The accusation hung between us, a challenge wrapped in her panic. She was fishing testing whether I knew the truth, and I wasn't ready to show my hand. "I've been buried in blueprints all week," I said, letting a trace of exhaustion color my tone. "Haven't touched the accounts, but I'll call Tom Bradley and sort it out." There was a pause long enough for me to picture her calculating, her green eyes narrowing as she weighed my words. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight. "Do it soon. I can't have this happening again." The call ended and I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. She was rattled, her confidence shaken by the first ripple of my counteroffensive. But the real storm was brewing at Dan's office, where Mike's next update confirmed my suspicions. "They're meeting now," he texted. "Dan's office, second floor. Windows open. I'm recording from across the street." An hour later, Mike sent an audio file, his message brief. "Listen to this." "They're spooked." I plugged in my earbuds, the office fading as their voices filled my ears, tense and urgent, like conspirators sensing the noose tightening. "We have a problem," Margaret said, her voice low, almost a hiss. "The accounts are frozen, Dan. All of them. I couldn't even pay for brunch. This isn't a coincidence." "Calm down," Dan replied, but his tone was strained, lacking its usual polish. "It's probably just a bank error. Did you talk to Alan? He claims he doesn't know anything." She said, her words clipped. "But he was at your house last night, Dan. Right outside. What if he heard us?" The air in my office seemed to thicken, the weight of their fear a tangible thing. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening as Dan's voice took on a defensive edge. He didn't hear anything. He was there for 2 minutes, tops. I saw him leave. Then why are the accounts frozen? Margaret's voice rose sharp with panic. And why was he asking about my doctor's appointment? He's fishing Dan. He knows something. "Impossible," Dan snapped, but there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in his lawyer's facade. "We've been careful. The documents are secure. The timeline's locked. He's not that smart, Margaret." Her laugh was bitter cutting. "Don't underestimate him. Alan built that company from nothing. He's not the fool you think he is." The irony was almost poetic, her acknowledgement of my strength, a twisted validation. I paused the recording, letting their words settle. They were unraveling their confidence, fracturing under the pressure of my silent moves. But Margaret's mention of my doctor's appointment, a lie I'd thrown to test her, confirmed her paranoia. She was watching me as closely as I was watching her, and that made her dangerous. I resumed the audio, their voices growing more frantic. "We need to move faster," Dan said. "File the divorce papers now before he figures it out. If we get the petition in front of a judge, we can lock in your share of the assets before he hides them." "And how do we explain the frozen accounts?" Margaret countered. "If he's already moving money, we're screwed." "Then we pivot," Dan said, his tone hardening. "We accuse him of financial abuse, controlling behavior. We can use Brianna's credentials to back it up, say she's observed signs of manipulation. The court will eat it up." My blood ran cold. They were planning to weaponize Brianna, to twist her integrity into a tool for their greed. But Brianna's resolve, her choice to stand with truth, was my shield against their scheme. They didn't know she'd heard the recording, that she'd already rejected their lies. Their desperation was making them reckless, and recklessness was a weakness I could exploit. The audio ended with Margaret's voice low and resolute. "We need to be sure, Dan. If Alan has that recording, if he heard us last night, we need to find it. Check his phone, his office, anything. We can't let him control the narrative." The office fell silent again, the weight of their panic settling over me like a dark fog. They were hunting for the recording, their fear confirming its power. But they were too late. The file was backed up in 3 secure locations, my cloud, Marcus's encrypted server, and a USB drive hidden in my office safe. They'd never find it, but their search would keep them distracted, their moves increasingly erratic. Mike's next text arrived as I processed the audio. They're splitting up. Margaret's heading home. Dan's on his phone trying to access the joint account. He's furious Bank's blocking him too. I smiled a cold, calculated curve of my lips. The frozen accounts were a chokehold cutting off their lifelines, forcing them to react rather than plan. Every move they made now was a step toward their own downfall. I stood pacing the office, my mind a whirlwind of strategy and resolve. The mystery of the offshore accounts still loomed. Marcus's trace on the unfamiliar IP address would take time, but it was a thread I'd follow to its end. For now I had the upper hand. Margaret's social humiliation, Dan's financial desperation, their frantic plotting, they were unraveling just as I'd planned. But the mention of Brianna as a pawn tightened the knot in my chest. I'd protect her not just as a father, but as a warrior guarding his strongest ally. The sun climbed higher, bathing the office in light, and I felt the stirrings of something ancient within me, a power forged in 35 years of building, breaking, and rebuilding. Margaret and Dan thought they were the predators, but they'd awakened a force they couldn't comprehend. I was Alan Cole, architect of empires, and this war was mine to win. The office was a fortress of quiet resolve, its walls steeped in the weight of my counteroffensive. The leather-bound journal lay open on my desk, its pages a chronicle of the war I'd waged since that rain-soaked night at Brianna's house. Margaret and Dan were unraveling their plan to seize my empire, crumbling under the pressure of frozen accounts and their own mounting paranoia. The recording 43 minutes of their venomous conspiracy was my sword, but Brianna was my shield. Her choice to stand with truth, a beacon in the storm. Yet the battlefield was shifting again, and I knew the next move would come from my daughter. She'd heard the truth, seen the betrayal in her mother's and husband's words, and now she was stepping into the fray. I was Alan Cole, architect of empires, and I trusted Brianna to wield her own power in this war. The morning stretched into noon, the sun casting golden threads through the office window, illuminating the blueprints and contracts that had built Cole Construction. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Rodriguez, my private investigator, his words sharp and urgent. Margaret's at a cafe on 3rd Street meeting Brianna. Looks tense. I'm recording from a distance. My heart clenched, a father's instinct warring with the strategist's need for control. Margaret was making her move, trying to pull Brianna into her web of lies, unaware that my daughter had already chosen her side. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking, and waited for the storm to break. An hour later, Mike sent an audio file, his message brief. Listen to this. Brianna's holding her own. I plugged in my earbuds, the office fading as Margaret's voice filled my ears, smooth and calculated. A siren's song laced with poison. Brianna, sweetheart. She began, her tone dripping with maternal warmth. I need your help. Your father's been controlling our finances, isolating me, making decisions without my input. It's abusive, honey. As a psychologist, you can see that, can't you? I could picture Brianna across the cafe table. Her green eyes eerily like Margaret's, but unclouded by deceit, narrowing as she dissected her mother's words. You're saying Dad's financially abusive, Brianna replied. Her voice calm, clinical, a psychologist probing for truth. Can you be specific? What actions has he taken that feel controlling? Margaret hesitated, a crack in her facade. He's secretive about the accounts. He's always handled the business finances, and now my cards aren't working. It's deliberate, Brianna. He's trying to trap me. The lie was as flimsy as a house built on sand, and Brianna's response was sharp, cutting through the deception. That's vague, Mom. Financial abuse requires a pattern, specific actions, documented incidents. Have you seen him move money without your knowledge? Deny you access to joint accounts? Because last I checked, you've been spending freely. That $8, $500 handbag you bought last week doesn't scream trapped. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the weight of Brianna's precision. I smiled, pride surging through me. My daughter wasn't just resisting, she was dismantling Margaret's narrative with the skill of a surgeon. "I'm trying to protect us," Margaret said, her voice tightening, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Your father's not the man you think he is. I need you to back me up, to use your expertise to show the court he's manipulative. It's for our future, Brianna, for you, for me, for stability." For stability, Brianna's tone was cold now, a blade honed by truth. Or for the $20 million you and Dan plan to take from him. The question landed like a thunderclap, and I could almost see Margaret's face pale, her composure shattering. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I heard you, Mom," Brianna said, her words steady, unyielding. "You and Dan at your house plotting to file for divorce and split Dad's assets. You thought you could use my credentials to paint him as the villain to manipulate the court. But I'm not your pawn." The audio crackled, capturing Margaret's sharp intake of breath. "Brianna, you're misunderstanding." "No, I'm not," Brianna cut in, her voice a beacon of clarity. "I heard every word. You've been playing the devoted wife for years, cataloging his assets, planning to take everything. And Dan, my husband, was your partner in this? How long have you two been working together? Mom? Is it just money, or is there more?" The question hung in the air, a shadow of suspicion that echoed my own. Margaret's silence was deafening, a confession in its absence. When she spoke again, her voice was low, almost pleading. "You don't understand, Brianna. I did this for us, for our family." "Stop," Brianna said, her tone final. "You did this for yourself. I'm done listening to lies." The audio ended and I sat back, my chest tight with a mix of pride and pain. Brianna had faced her mother's betrayal head-on, her strength, a mirror of the resilience I'd fought to reclaim. But the mention of Dan stung, a reminder that her own marriage was crumbling under the weight of his treachery. I wanted to shield her, to spare her the pain, but she'd chosen truth over comfort, and I had to honor that. By late afternoon, Brianna called, her voice steady but heavy with resolve. "Dad, I need to see you. I'm coming to the office." She arrived 20 minutes later, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a fire I recognized, the fire of someone who'd seen the truth and refused to look away. She sat across from my desk, her hands folded, every inch the psychologist, but also my daughter, wounded, yet unbroken. "I confronted Mom," she said without preamble. "She tried to manipulate me just like I thought, but I called her out and she crumbled." "I heard," I said, my voice soft. "Mike sent me the audio. You were incredible, Brianna." Her lips twitched, a faint smile overshadowed by pain. "It hurt, Dad, hearing her admit it, even indirectly. But I needed to know. I needed to see her for who she is." "I'm sorry," I said, the words heavy with a father's regret. "I didn't want you caught in this." "I know," she said, her gaze steady. "But I'm not a bystander. I'm your daughter, and I'm not letting them destroy you." She paused, her voice softening. "There's something else. I'm going to confront Dan. Tonight." My heart clenched, protective instincts flaring. "Brianna, he's dangerous, desperate. You don't know what he's capable of." "I do," she said, her tone resolute. "I've spent years analyzing people, Dad. Dan's a narcissist, driven by ambition and greed. He's not violent, he's too calculating for that. But he's cornered, and I need to end this on my terms." I wanted to argue to keep her safe, but the fire in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't just my daughter, she was a force, a woman who'd chosen truth over loyalty, integrity over illusion. "Be careful," I said finally. "And if you need me, I'm there." "I know," she said, standing. "But this is my fight, too." That evening, Mike's next update came as a voice message, his tone clipped with urgency. "Brianna's at her house with Dan. I'm outside recording. She's not backing down." I played the audio, my pulse quickening as Brianna's voice filled the room, calm but unyielding, a storm wrapped in steel. "Dan, we need to talk," she began, her words deliberate. "A psychologist laying a trap. I know about your plan with Mom. The divorce, the assets, the $20 million. I heard you plotting at our house." Dan's laugh was forced, a hollow echo of his usual confidence. "Brianna, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just business talk, hypotheticals." "Hypotheticals?" Her voice cut through his like a blade. "You plan to use my credentials to accuse Dad of abuse. You conspired to take everything he built, everything he gave us. You're not just my husband, you're a traitor." The silence that followed was electric, charged with the weight of her accusation. When Dan spoke, his voice was low, desperate. "You don't understand, Brianna. Your mother's the one pushing this. I'm just trying to secure our future." "Our future?" Brianna's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You used me, Dan. You used our marriage to get to Dad's money. It's over. I'm filing for divorce." "Brianna?" "Wait," he began, but her voice drowned him out. "No. You don't get to talk your way out of this. I have evidence, Dan. Recordings, documents, proof of your debts and your lies. Memos. You're done." The audio ended and I exhaled, relief and pride flooding through me. Brianna had faced her husband's betrayal with the same clarity she'd shown with Margaret. Her strength a beacon in the darkness of their conspiracy. She wasn't just rejecting Dan, she was dismantling his facade, exposing the coward beneath the lawyer's polish. Mike's final text arrived as I processed the audio. "Dan's packing a bag. Looks like he's leaving the house. Brianna's fine, calm, and control. She's a force, Alan." I smiled, the weight in my chest easing slightly. My daughter had chosen her path, and it was one of truth and strength. The war wasn't over, but with Brianna by my side, the battlefield felt less daunting. I stood gazing out the office window at the city skyline, its steel and glass a testament to the empire I'd built. Margaret and Dan were scrambling their plans, fracturing under the weight of their own greed. But Brianna's choice had changed everything. She was no longer a pawn in their game, but a warrior in mine. The shadows of betrayal still loomed, but together we'd face them, armed with truth and resolve. The office was a citadel now, its walls imbued with the quiet strength of my resolve. The leather-bound journal on my desk chronicled every move in this war. The frozen accounts, Mike Rodriguez's surveillance, Brianna's fierce stand against her mother and husband. The recording 43 minutes of Margaret and Dan's treachery was my Excalibur, a blade of truth that had already begun to cut through their web of lies. My daughter's choice to align with honesty had shifted the battlefield, and now the air thrummed with the inevitability of their collapse. I was Alan Cole, architect of empires, a man who'd built coal construction from a single nail and a dream, and I was ready to watch my enemies fall into the abyss they'd carved for themselves. The afternoon sun bathed Davenport in a golden haze, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the cold clarity within me. Margaret and Dan were scrambling, their confidence shattered by the frozen accounts and Brianna's rejection. Mike Rodriguez's updates painted a vivid picture. Margaret's humiliation at Riverside Country Club had spread like wildfire through her social circle, whispers of her declined credit card rippling through the elite she'd once ruled. Dan, meanwhile, was drowning in his own ambition. His attempts to access the joint accounts met with stone walls and bank notices. Their desperation was my advantage, a crack in their armor I'd widen until it broke. My phone buzzed with a new message from Mike, his words sharp with discovery. "Margaret's been dropped from the club's charity board. Word's out about her financial issues. Nobody wants the drama. She's at home now, pacing. Dan's at his office on a call with the State Bar Association. Sounds like trouble." I leaned back in my chair, a grim smile tugging at my lips. The social fortress Margaret had built, her throne of luncheons, galas, and designer handbags, was crumbling, each rejection a brick falling from her empire of appearances. Dan's troubles, though, were even more promising. The Bar Association's scrutiny wasn't a coincidence. I'd made a discreet call to a contact in the legal community, nudging them toward Dan's history of ethical complaints. The dominoes were falling, and I'd set them in motion. By evening, Mike sent another update, this one with an audio file, Dan's meeting with a bar investigator. Recorded from outside his office. He's sweating. I plugged in my earbuds, the office fading as Dan's voice filled the space, strained and defensive. A far cry from the polished lawyer who'd plotted my ruin. The complaints are baseless, he insisted, his words clipped. Disgruntled clients, nothing more. I've never mismanaged funds. The investigator's voice was calm, unyielding, a blade of authority. We've received new evidence, Mr. Thompson. Wire transfers from a client's account to your personal one totaling $47,000. Care to explain? I could almost hear Dan's pulse quicken, his composure fracturing like glass under pressure. That was a loan, he stammered. From a family member. Perfectly legal. From Margaret Cole, the investigator pressed, and the silence that followed was a confession in itself. We'll need documentation. And there's the matter of your office lease. $8,500 a month unpaid for 3 months. Your creditors are talking, Mr. Thompson. This doesn't look good. The audio ended and I exhaled satisfaction, mingling with the ache of betrayal. Dan's house of cards was collapsing, his ambition and greed exposed to the light. The $47,000 from Margaret, money she'd siphoned from our joint accounts, was a noose tightening around his neck. He'd thought himself a mastermind, but he was a pawn caught in his own reckless schemes. Margaret's downfall was quieter but no less devastating. A call from Tom Bradley, my bank president and golf partner, confirmed what Mike had hinted: her social circle was abandoning her. She tried to book a table at the club for tomorrow, Tom said, his voice tinged with amusement. They turned her away politely, of course, but the message was clear. Her name's toxic now. Nobody wants to be associated with someone who can't pay her bills. The image of Margaret, once the queen of Riverside's elite, reduced to a pariah, should have brought joy. Instead, it stirred a pang of grief, a fleeting echo of the woman I'd loved, or thought I'd loved. But the memory of her voice on the recording, "He actually believes I love him," snuffed out the sentiment. She'd chosen her path, and now she walked it alone. I turned my focus to the community that had sustained me. A dinner that evening with Jim Morrison, my longtime supplier, and other industry allies was a calculated move. Over steak and bourbon at Romano's, I shared just enough to cement my position. Vague hints of personal challenges, a nod to Cole Construction's strength, and gratitude for their support. "You've always been a rock," Alan Jim said, clapping my shoulder. "Whatever's going on, we've got your back." Their loyalty was a shield reinforcing my empire, while Margaret's crumbled. The next morning, Brianna called, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "It's done, Dad," she said. "I filed for divorce yesterday. Dan's gone, he packed a bag and left town. I don't know where, and I don't care." My heart ached for her, but pride overshadowed the pain. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," I said, my voice thick. "But you were incredible, Brianna. You stood for truth." "I had to," she said, her tone resolute. "He tried to use my practice, my integrity, to hurt you. I couldn't let that stand." "You're stronger than I ever was," I said. And I meant it. She'd faced her husband's betrayal with a courage that mirrored my own, a legacy of strength I hadn't realized I'd passed down. "There's more," she said, her voice lowering. "I found something in Dan's office before he left, a notebook hidden in a locked drawer. It's got notes on your offshore accounts, Dad. Dates, amounts, even the names of the shell companies. I don't know how he got it, but it's detailed." The revelation hit like a lightning bolt, deepening the mystery of the offshore accounts. "Bring it to me," I said, my mind racing. "And be careful, Brianna. If Dan's desperate, he might try something." "He won't," she said, her voice cold with certainty. "He's a coward, Dad. He's running." She arrived at the office an hour later, the notebook in hand, a slim black volume that felt heavier than it should, like a grimoire of secrets. Its pages were meticulous. Dan's handwriting, cataloging my offshore accounts with chilling precision. Account numbers, transfer dates, even a reference to Marcus Webb's firm. How had he accessed this? The anomaly. Marcus had flagged the unfamiliar IP address was a thread I needed to pull but cautiously. A traitor in Marcus's firm, a hacker, or something more sinister. The question hung like a shadow, but the notebook was another weapon in my arsenal. I locked it in my office safe, its presence a reminder of the stakes. "Thank you," I told Brianna, my voice soft. "This changes everything." She nodded, her eyes weary but resolute. "What's next, Dad?" "We wait," I said, my tone steady. "They're falling apart, but the final blow comes in court." "We're almost there." She left her stride purposeful, a warrior returning to her own battlefield. I sat alone, the notebook's secrets humming in the silence. Margaret's social empire was in ruins. Dan's professional life was collapsing, and I stood stronger than ever, surrounded by allies and armed with evidence. The mystery of the offshore accounts lingered, a puzzle I'd solve in time, but for now I held the upper hand. The war was nearing its end, and I was ready to claim victory. The morning of the trial dawned with a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm, the sky over Davenport, a canvas of pale gold and shadow. My office, once a war room, was now a shrine to the battle I'd fought and won. The leather-bound journal lay closed on my desk, its pages a testament to my counter-offensive offshore accounts, secured joint accounts frozen, Mike Rodriguez's surveillance, Brianna's fierce stand, and the notebook that revealed Dan's meticulous treachery. The recording 43 minutes of Margaret and Dan's venomous conspiracy was my Excalibur, a blade of truth poised to strike in the courtroom. I was Alan Cole, architect of empires, a man who'd built coal construction from a single nail and a dream, and today I would reclaim my life from the ashes of betrayal. The courthouse loomed like a stone sentinel, its marble steps worn smooth by decades of truth and lies. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of judgment, the wooden pews filled with whispers and sidelong glances. I sat beside my attorney, James Morrison, a grizzled veteran who'd fought legal battles with the same tenacity I'd brought to construction sites. His gray eyes gleamed with quiet confidence as he adjusted his tie, the notebook, and recording safely in his briefcase. Across the aisle, Margaret sat rigid, her designer suit, a last-ditch effort to maintain her facade. Dan was absent, his absence a shadow that hung over the proceedings like a specter of guilt. Brianna sat behind me, her presence a beacon of strength, her green eyes steady and unyielding. The judge, Patricia Hendrick, took her seat, her gaze sharp as a blade. "This is a hearing for an emergency restraining order filed by Margaret Cole against Alan Cole, alleging financial abuse and controlling behavior." She began, her voice cutting through the room. "Mrs. Cole, your counsel may proceed." Margaret's attorney, a sleek woman named Evelyn Carter, rose with practiced grace. "Your Honor, my client has endured years of financial manipulation by her husband, Alan Cole." She said, her tone smooth but laced with venom. "He has restricted her access to joint accounts, isolated her socially, and exhibited controlling behaviors that constitute abuse. We request an immediate order to restore her financial access and protect her interests." The words were a carefully crafted spell designed to paint me as the villain. Margaret's face was a mask of victimhood, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. I felt a flicker of the old pain, the ghost of the woman I'd loved for 30 years, but it was drowned by the fire of my resolve. I'd built an empire from nothing, faced storms of every kind, and I would not let her lies prevail. James stood, his presence commanding, a warrior wielding truth as his weapon. "Your Honor, the allegations are not only baseless, but part of a calculated scheme by Mrs. Cole and her associate Daniel Thompson to defraud my client of his assets." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and Margaret's composure faltered, her hands clenching in her lap. "We have evidence," James continued, "that directly contradicts Mrs. Cole's claims and reveals her true intentions." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she held her ground. "Objection. Your Honor, this is speculative and irrelevant to the immediate issue of financial access." Overruled. Judge Hendricks said, her gaze fixed on James. "I'll hear the evidence." "Proceed, Mr. Morrison." James opened his briefcase, producing a USB drive that gleamed like a talisman in the courtroom's dim light. "This is a recording, Your Honor, made by my client on the night of April 15th, capturing a conversation between Margaret Cole and Daniel Thompson, her son-in-law and co-conspirator at Mr. Thompson's residence." The courtroom fell silent, the air charged with anticipation. Margaret's face drained of color, her eyes darting to the exit, as if she could flee the truth. James inserted the USB into a laptop, and the speakers crackled to life, Margaret's voice filling the room like a curse. "When the old man finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. The business, the properties, the accounts. $20 million, Dan, all ours." The words echoed, each one a hammer striking the foundation of Margaret's lies. Dan's voice followed, cold and calculating, outlining their plan to file for divorce and seize half my assets under Iowa's laws. The courtroom was a frozen tableau, every eye on Margaret as her mask crumbled. She gripped the table, her knuckles white, her breath shallow, as the recording played on, exposing her mockery of our marriage, her cataloging of my assets, her plan to use Brianna's credentials to bolster their case. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening, broken only by Judge Hendricks' voice, sharp and unyielding. "Mrs. Cole, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording?" Margaret's attorney scrambled, her voice rising in protest. "Your Honor, this was obtained without consent, a violation of privacy. It was recorded in a public space outside an open window." James countered, his tone steady. "My client was within his legal rights. Furthermore, we have corroborating evidence." He produced the notebook. Brianna had found its pages, a damning chronicle of Dan's research into my offshore accounts. This notebook recovered from Mr. Thompson's office details Mr. Cole's private financial structures, information he could only have obtained through illicit means. The judge's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the notebook, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Cole," she said, turning to Margaret, "I'm giving you an opportunity to respond." Margaret's voice trembled, her facade shattered. It's not what it sounds like," she stammered, her eyes darting to Brianna, pleading for salvation. "I was protecting our family, our future." "Enough," Judge Hendricks said, her voice cutting through the lie like a blade. "The evidence suggests a premeditated scheme to defraud your husband. This court will not entertain baseless accusations of abuse to further such a plan. The request for a restraining order is denied." She paused, her gaze piercing. "Mrs. Cole, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney about the legal consequences of perjury and fraud. This matter may warrant further investigation." The gavel fell, a thunderclap, sealing Margaret's fate. She sat frozen, her eyes wide with the realization that her empire of lies had collapsed. Brianna's hand found mine, her grip steady, a silent promise of solidarity. The courtroom emptied, whispers trailing in our wake, but I felt lighter, as if a weight I'd carried for months had been lifted. The consequences unfolded swiftly in the days that followed. Margaret's divorce filing was dismissed, the court citing her fraudulent intent. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed 30 years ago, something she'd dismissed as irrelevant, resurfaced, limiting her to a modest settlement, far from the millions she'd coveted. Her social circle, already fraying, abandoned her entirely, the Riverside elite closing ranks against the scandal. She took a job at a boutique in the mall where she'd once shopped, with abandoned her designer handbags replaced by a cashier's apron, her throne reduced to a counter. Dan's fall was even steeper. The State Bar Association, armed with the notebook and evidence of his $47,000 loan from Margaret, revoked his law license permanently. His debts overwhelmed him, forcing him to flee to Nebraska, where he took a low-level paralegal job, his ambition buried under the wreckage of his greed. The mystery of the offshore accounts was resolved when Marcus traced the unfamiliar IP address to a hacker Dan had hired, a desperate move that had backfired, exposing their plan instead of concealing it. Brianna, my beacon of strength, finalized her divorce from Dan. her resolve unbroken. She threw herself into her psychology practice, specializing in family therapy, turning her pain into purpose. Her new office, funded by a loan I'd quietly arranged, was a testament to her resilience, a space where she helped others rebuild what betrayal had broken. As for me, I stood stronger than ever. Coal construction thrived, bolstered by the loyalty of allies like Jim Morrison and Tom Bradley, who'd rallied around me during the storm. The community saw me not as a victim, but as a titan, a man who'd faced betrayal and emerged victorious. The house, once tainted by Margaret's lies, felt like home again, its rooms filled with the quiet promise of a new chapter. I stood at my office window gazing at the Davenport skyline, its steel and glass a mirror of my own strength. The war was over, the battlefield cleared, and I was still standing, my empire intact, my daughter by my side. The shadows of betrayal had faded, replaced by a light forged in truth and resilience. I was Alan Cole, and I had won. The sun dipped low over Davenport, painting the Mississippi River in hues of amber and violet, a quiet symphony of light that mirrored the peace settling in my chest. My office, once a war room pulsing with the urgency of battle, was now a sanctuary of reflection, its oak shelves and steel desk bearing witness to the empire I'd defended. The leather-bound journal lay closed, its pages, a chronicle of a war won. Margaret and Dan's conspiracy exposed, their plans shattered in the courtroom. My daughter Brianna standing tall as a beacon of truth. The recording 43 minutes of betrayal had been my Excalibur, a blade of truth that cut through their lies. I was Alan Cole, architect of empires, a man who'd built coal construction from a single nail and a dream, and now I stood on the other side of betrayal, whole and unbroken. I walked through my house, its halls once tainted by Margaret's deception, now cleansed by the light of truth. The wedding photo on the mantel was gone, replaced by a framed blueprint of Cole Construction's first project, a modest home that had sparked a legacy. The rooms felt different now, not just a structure of brick and mortar, but a haven of authenticity, free from the shadows of lies. I paused at the window, gazing at the garden where Margaret had once tended roses, their blooms now wild and untamed. A reminder that beauty could thrive without manipulation. The war had left scars, but they were badges of survival. 30 years of marriage had been a tapestry woven with moments I'd thought were love. Margaret's laughter at our anniversary dinner, her hand in mine during Brianna's graduation. The quiet nights when her whispers felt like promises. The recording had revealed them as illusions, a carefully crafted spell to keep me building an empire she could plunder. Yet in the pain of that truth, I'd found something deeper. The strength to rebuild, to redefine love, not as blind trust, but as earned loyalty. Brianna had taught me that. Her courage in confronting her mother and husband, her choice to stand with truth over family, had been a mirror reflecting my own resilience. She was thriving now, her psychology practice a sanctuary for others seeking to heal from betrayal. The loan I'd provided was a small gesture, a father's support for a daughter who'd become my greatest ally. Her new office overlooking the river was a testament to her strength, a place where she turned pain into purpose, just as I'd turned blueprints into buildings. Margaret's fate was a quiet tragedy, a shadow of her own making. Stripped of her social throne, she worked at a mall boutique. Her designer handbags replaced by a cashier's apron, her days spent serving the elite she'd once commanded. I felt no joy in her fall, only a muted sorrow for the woman I'd once loved, or thought I'd loved. Dan, too, had faded into obscurity. His law license revoked, his ambition buried in a Nebraska paralegal job. The notebook he'd kept, a meticulous map of my offshore accounts, had been his undoing. The hacker he'd hired, a final act of desperation that exposed their scheme. The mystery of the offshore accounts had been solved, a thread unraveled by Marcus Webb's relentless tracing. The unfamiliar IP address led to a low-rent hacker. Dan had paid a reckless move that had left a digital trail for us to follow. It was a fitting end to their conspiracy, their greed undone by their own hubris. My empire stood stronger than ever, bolstered by allies like Jim Morrison and Tom Bradley, who'd rallied around me in the storm. Cole Construction's contracts flowed steadily, each project a brick in the legacy I'd fought to protect. I stepped onto the porch, the evening air cool and crisp, carrying the scent of river water and blooming jasmine. The house felt alive again, its walls humming with the quiet truth of a life reclaimed. I thought of the lessons carved into my soul by this war, that love is not blind trust, but a bond forged in honesty, that strength is not just in building, but in enduring. That betrayal, though painful, can be a crucible for rebirth. I'd been a fool to believe Margaret's lies, but I was no longer that man. I was Alan Cole, a warrior who'd faced shadows and emerged into the light. Brianna joined me on the porch, her presence a quiet comfort. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, her green eyes reflecting the river's glow. "Better than okay," I said, smiling. "This house, it's home again?" She nodded, her hand resting on mine, a gesture that spoke louder than words. We stood together watching the sunset paint the sky, the world settling into a gentle rhythm. The war was over. The battlefield cleared, and in its place was a peace hard won, a future built on truth. I closed my eyes, letting the river's song wash over me. The shadows of betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet strength, a legacy of resilience shared with my daughter. I was Alan Cole, and I had not just survived, I had triumphed.